Hi, I'm Jim Knotts, President and CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Welcome to today's virtual reading of the names. 2022 marks the 40th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. As part of our commemoration, we'll host an in-person reading of the names at the wall from November 7th through 10th, 2022, when all 58,281 names on the wall will be read aloud. In the lead up to that event, we'll be reading names each day online while sharing the photos of these heroes. For our daily virtual reading, the names of the service members will be read by month and day of death between the years 1956 and 1975 in alphabetical order for the given day. We apologize in advance for any mispronunciations. Know that our readers are doing their best to honor these service members. We hope you'll listen and watch each day and share with others as we remember and honor those who gave their lives during the Vietnam War.
Rex William Ackerman, Lee Chester Adams, Lee Aaron Adams, William Adams Jr., Joseph John Agree Jr., Paul Edward Allard, Donald Ray Allen, Willie Frank Amos, Harold James Annable, Reese Mark Anderson, Gerald Dwayne Angeli, Paul Orban Applegate, George Casper Barsom III, John Oliver Bauman, Charles C. Beard, Andrew Albert Bydron Jr., William Wayne Bishop, Daniel Edward Bishop, Douglas Randolph Blodgett, Joseph A. Bobanick Jr., Dennis Opal Bolton, Harold Gene Bottoms, Robert Richard Bradley, John Richard Brooks, Robert Everett Brooks, Joseph Orville Brown, Sammy Brian Bruce, Charles Arthur Bucinda, Patrick Palmer Calhoun, Dennis Rocco Cama, Michael Joseph Caparelli, Joseph Leonard Colati, Larry Houston Cook, Robert Joe Cope, James David Kraft, Lawrence Irwin Crawley, James Charles Croce, Clifton Henry Davis, David Kim Dieter, William Roy Dennis, Henry Louis Dew, Kevin Thomas Doreen, Wilford Leon Dyer, Harry Lee Eckerd, Gilbert Edwards, Frank Louis Friedel, Dean Lee Frey, Dana Stanley Frost, Galen Ray Gallion, Robert Eugene Gardner, John Stephen Jentkowski, Billy Wayne Glass, Juan Gomez Rivera, Thomas Gonzalez, Jesus Armando Gonzalez, Forrest Goodlock, John Smith Hamilton, Richard Lamar Hannon, Larry Neal Harper, Charles J. Harrington, Dennis Ray Hartpence, Kenneth Marvin Hatcher, Charles Edward Hawk, Herbert Reiji Hayashida,
Arthur Franklin Henderson, Sterling Craig Hendricks, Arthur F. Hennessy Jr., Lawrence Lewis Hensey Jr., Joseph K. Hollingsworth, Anthony Frank Hausch, Robert Dawson Huey Jr., Alfred Jackson, James Dale Jarrett, James Paul Jensen, Jeffrey Joel Joseph, Walter Eugene Justice Sr., Kenneth Eugene Casa, Robert George Kajowski, Melvin Lynn Kirk, John Lee Quebecki, Roland Charles Labonte, Paul Noble Larson, Michael Glenn Lipsius, Joe Gilbert Longoria, Arthur James Lord, Darrell Lee Lowry, Douglas Delane Mack, Daryl Zane Magruder, Carlos Alberto Marcano, Gregory Lawrence Martin, Walter Francis E. Mattis Jr., David Earl Matthews, Orrin B. McCarroll, Jerry Vernon McDonald, David Lauren McGill, Richard Lee McMinn, Edward Thomas Mello Jr., Gilbert Mendoza, Janice Mickles, Charles Worth Millard, Charles Francis Millay, Terry Brown Miller, Terry Wayne Mills, Jenice Isaac Mobley, George Wesley Montgomery, Percy Moore, Carl Philip Morrison, A. D. Mosley, Roy Thomas Moss, David John Nessett, Gilbert Olivar, Bruce Dennis Olson, Alberto Ortiz Jr., Marcelo Ortiz Jr., Bennett Howell Owens Jr., Dennis Earl Painter, Gerard Vincent Palma, Roland John Panaris, James Lloyd Parsons, Billy J. Patterson, Andrew James Payne Jr., James Clifford Pearson, Richard Steve Penniman, Paul John Pesci, Dillard Eric Peterson, Thomas Stokes Powell, Arnold John Rahm, Larry Ray Reeves,
Glenn Thomas Ridley, Curtis Ray Riley, Arturo Recio Rios, Jerry Leroy Reisinger, Richard Joseph Robbins, Timothy George Robinson, Casimiro Rodriguez Jr., Theodore S. Rolstad, David Gregory Salinas, John Charles Sapp, James Ray Sculf, Jeffrey Paul Searles, Clifford Lloyd Sell, Philip Raymond Schaefer, John Harold Sherman, Alfonso Donato Cierchio, Carrie Joseph Smith, George Henry Smith, Willis Wilson Smith, Jr., Lawrence James Snyder, Lee Allen Stedman, Gary Lynn Steele, Joseph John Signator, Charles Lewis Tank, Tommy Lee Taylor, Bernard Reinhold Terhost, Charles Ellis Thomas, Russell Lee Thompson, Freddie Thompson, Jr., Thelbert K. Thompson, Jr., Joseph Lloyd Thorne, Robert Carl Trigg, Clarence Edward Umstadt, Purvis B. Valentine, Jr., George Jefferson Van Gundy, Robert Donald Walker, James Arthur Wall, Michael John Wallace, Michael Ray Werdehoff, Gary Leroy Wesselman, Freddie Whitaker, John Edward Wilburn, Stanley Walensky Jr., Jerome I. Wilson, William Prather York, Louis John Young, Leroy Young Jr.,